What is up, guys, and welcome back to another video over here on YouTube. In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 crucial tips on how to improve your double board PLO bomb pot instantaneously. Now, this video is in the anticipation of our course launch, Mastering Double Board Bomb Pots, which I will go over at the end of this video and show you around what this product is all about, what to expect, and also who it is for. But to begin with, I want to talk a bit more about bomb pots, what they are, why they are so impactful to your bottom line, and then go over those 5 strategical tips you want to look out for to improve your win rate. If you have been playing live poker in the last couple of years, or you're playing on app games, then you're familiar with double board bomb pots. It is a game that in live games, for example, every 30 minutes as the dealer change is approaching, happens one hand. So basically every 30 minutes, you would play one hand of double board PLO bomb pot. And you might think that's not a lot of hands. You know, I play most hands in normal PLO with one board. Why do I need to become better at double board? Well, it's for 2 reasons. One of them is that a double board PLO bomb pot hand takes a lot longer than a single board hand. So usually around 7 to 8 minutes. And if you end up spending 7 to 8 minutes every 30 minutes, that is 15 minutes every hour. So around a quarter of your playing time will be spent playing double board PLO bomb pots in live games. So 25% of your playing time, which just shows that you can't avoid improving at them, or you can't avoid playing good at them if you want to be a profitable player. Secondary, the size of the double board bomb pot is significantly larger than a regular pot. We have 7 players or 8 players anteing in a normal game, somewhere between 2 and 5, sometimes even 10 big blinds to the double board PLO bomb pot. So down here at the Aria, for example, they're playing 5-5-10. In a 5-5-10 game, the traditional size of the ante in the double board bomb pot is $25, so that's 2.5 big blinds. And if a $20 straddle is on in the regular game, the bomb pot will be $50. So you can expect an hourly as a good professional player in this game of around $100. So imagine it would be $100, then the $50 an hour or the $100 an hour is either 50% of your win rate or 100% of your entire hourly win rate. That is the part of your anteing in the double board bomb pot scenario. So that just shows how impactful it is to be playing well in these spots, because the ante is big, the size of the pot is large, and also you're going to be playing bomb pots very frequently. Now, on top of that, the edge you can gain in double board bomb pots can be massive, because most players have never thought about how to approach double board bomb pots from a theoretical and strategical base. We're going to talk about this today, but obviously a lot more in depth in the course. Most people are familiar with PLO, and they sit down to play PLO with a single board, and they kind of play the double board bomb pot similar as the single board, and that is a huge mistake, and we're going to talk about this in today's video. So, again, double board bomb pots have a huge impact on your bottom line if you play in a game where they will play double boards frequently. Now, next up, I want to talk about what is the difference between a double board bomb pot hand and just a single board PLO hand, whether it is a bomb pot or not. So this is an example here of the first hand we're going to break down here in a moment. But basically what happens in double board is you get dealt a hand, and this is the hand we have in this case, king, queen, 5 deuce with 2 hearts and 2 clubs. And then the dealer deals out 2 separate flops. The first flop is 5 deuce deuce with 2 hearts and a diamond. And the second flop is ace 8 7 with 2 spades and 1 club. So what happens here is the pot gets split in half. That's why it's called a split pot game. And half the pot will be awarded to whoever has the best hand at showdown at the top, which we're going to call board 1. And the second half will be awarded to whoever wins the pot on board 2, which is the bottom board. So the pot will always be split in half, where in other split pot games like 8 or better or high-low games in general, you have to qualify for the low. So if you play Omaha high-low, for example, it's also a split pot game, but not a low is not always possible, or not always someone has a low, and that means that the entire pot will be awarded to the high hand. This is different in double board bomb pots because there are always 2 boards, which means the board will always be a split pot, and you always want to go for both boards if you want to scoop the whole thing. So let's talk about this first hand to begin with, in our first lesson, so to speak. Now, this hand was played by a friend of mine who is very good at playing PLO. PLO 4 cards, just regular PLO, not a split pot game like double board. And this friend was visiting me here in Vegas and jumped into some of the games, and they played double board. And this was basically the first hand this friend of mine has played at double board bomb pots. And he ends up showing up with king, queen, 5 deuce, and he flops the full house at the top on board 1 and flops absolutely nothing on board number 2. Now, how good is this hand? And is this hand good enough to start betting or calling bets and so on? Now, there's a lot to be said about all these different concepts, but I'm just going to introduce you to some key points per hand, even though there's more to be said about them. The main thing I'm going to drive home here is, number one, there is a big difference between having the nuts on one board and having the only nuts. Now, in this case, my friend doesn't even have the nuts on 5 deuce deuce. Pocket deuces would be the nuts, and then followed by 5-5. But he basically has a strong made hand on board number 1. The problem, though, is that this hand is not the only nuts. Now, what I mean with only nuts is that there are a lot of situations where you can have, let's say, a straight or a full house, where you might have the current nuts on this board, but you can actually share the nuts with someone else. And if you share the nuts with someone else, like in this case, if someone else has 5 deuce as well, it could be a huge problem, and usually is. Now, the reason this is not intuitive to regular PLO players is because in case of a split in regular PLO, there's no problem. You just end up splitting the pot and you can't lose, because whatever you put into the middle, you get back out plus whatever was in the middle, right? You're just splitting the entire pot. But that's different in a split pot game, because if you end up splitting the top in this case, so the 5 deuce, you end up having to surrender or lose the bottom. So you are going to end up getting quartered. So let's say there would be 100 in the middle. The problem is that at the top you end up splitting, and that means you only get $25 and not $50, because you only win half the pot, or you win half of half the pot, right? That means you're getting 3/4. So the first thing I want you guys to pay attention to is that splitting is usually not good enough because you're playing a split pot game. So if you have a hand that is the nuts, but not the only nuts, then you have to be really careful when driving action. Now, what happened in this case is that my friend got the money in on the flop 3 ways, which is a whole other disaster, which we're going to talk about at a different point. He got it in 3 ways, and one of the players also had 5 deuce, and the other player had ace. And again, the problem here is that basically he's splitting half on the top of the other guy that has 5 deuce if they end up having the same hand on the showdown. And the other guy is kind of free rolling them because he has top set at the bottom, and he can still improve on the 5 deuce deuce flop by hitting an ace. And in this case, the opponent actually had ace, jack, and ended up hitting a jack on the top board and held at the bottom and scooped the entire pot. But it basically just illustrates how you can become really attached to a certain board or a hand, even though you shouldn't, given the split pot element of it. Now let's move over to the second hand. So this is a hand that I played myself. I'm going to read out the board in just a moment. Don't focus too much on that. But basically what happened here is we're playing 25-50 at the aria, and we're all putting in $100 to the flop. So we have $800 in the middle. And the way this hand goes down is I have 9-7-7-3 with 3 hearts in the small blind, so I'm first to act on every street. On the first flop, 10-6 deuce, I flop a gut shot. Not much else to work with. And on the second board, queen 6-5 with 2 hearts, I also flop a gut shot and a flush draw alongside. So I check, because obviously my hand is certainly not good enough to drive action here and start putting a lot of chips into the middle. I want to check and see how this develops. Now, everyone checks, and we head to the turn. Still 800 in the middle. On the first turn, I hit a set on the 7 of spades. And on the second turn, the king of clubs, I don't improve. So I check once again. And now the big blind bets $400, which is half the pot. Everyone else folds, and it's up to me. Now, against one single opponent, the main thing you want to ask yourself always at any point in double board is, which board is this player mainly playing? And the key takeaway here is that when people drive action, when people start betting into 4, 5, 6 players or 7 players on the flop or the turn, then their decisions are mainly driven by whichever board is the more static board. So in this case, you have board number 1, which is very static because 8-9 is the current nuts, and not that many hands have a ton of equity against 8-9. And the second board is very dynamic, right? On the second board, Queen 6-5 King, there are a lot of straight draws and flush draw combinations out there. So even if this guy in the big blind had pocket kings, it would be quite unusual for a lot of players to bet at this point, because pocket kings is not a hand that can handle that much heat on the turn when it runs into 8-9. 8-9 is a mate hand. Pocket kings, there are a bunch of hands where 8-9 has equity to free roll against pocket kings. So for example, if the player has 8-9 of hearts, then he ends up having the straight at the top and pocket kings is dead at the top, but he has a flush draw and a gut shot at the bottom. Very bad scenario for pocket kings or pocket queens or king queen, right? So basically, always ask yourself which board is the more static board, which is usually the board people drive action from. And that also should be the same for yourself. If you had to choose between holding a very strong hand on the static board versus holding a very strong hand on the dynamic board, you definitely prefer having a stronghold on the static board. So in this case, I'm assuming my opponent has 8-9 a lot more often than playing the bottom. Now, obviously, you can have a combo hand in this case, for example, King 8-9 or Queen 8-9 or 8-9-7, in which case you would have a wrap at the bottom. So you definitely could have something on both boards. But what you will see is that oftentimes people play too aggressive when they have the nuts on one board, but not the only nuts, right? We discussed this in hand number 1. The only nuts means only you can have the nuts. For example, let's say you have the nut flush. Now, no one else can have the nut flush because you have the single card that is required, which in most cases would be the ace of that suit, right? So if you have the nut flush, you have the only nuts and you can drive a lot of action. But if you have the nut straight, someone else can also have the nut straight, and you have to be careful driving action because it really matters what you have on the second board. But anyway, a lot of players in this case, in this scenario here, even if you're 8-handed or 7-handed, would drive a lot of action with 8-9 and would be a lot more passive with a hand like pocket queens or pocket kings or king queen, unless they have significant backup on board number 2. Anyway, that's my read going into the turn. As my opponent bets 400, I make the call with a set and a gut shot and a flush draw at the bottom. Now the top fills up, I make 7s full, and then on the bottom I completely break. And this is where things become a bit iffy. I'm out of position, so I have a decision between betting and checking. Now, there is a massive difference in double board PLO bomb pot, which is the next takeaway, between making a bet and facing a bet, right? So in regular PLO, there's not much of a difference because you only play one board. If you happen to have the best hand and you face a bet or make a bet, there isn't that much of a difference in terms of what you're competing for. But in double board, it's very different. If you end up having a good hand only on one board, like in this case, I have 7s full at the top, which is the best hand, but at the bottom, my pocket 7s are usually not good, then there is a big difference between facing a bet and making a bet. If I make a bet, I can win the entire pot, right? Because I can scoop in case my opponent folds. And that would be a big win if I have a really worthless hand on the other board. However, if I face a bet and I can only call, then the best case scenario that I can reach is to chop, right? So in this case, if I check and my opponent bets full pot, I hope my pocket 7s are good. I don't run into pocket 10s, but basically I always expect to only win half or lose. And that is a really bad proposition. The math behind this basically works out like that. If you face a pot-sized bet on the river, and you know that you only have one board, you can only win one board at best, then you need to win that one board 66% of the time, which is a huge percentage to break even, right? So if I check and my opponent pots this river, and I think I'm going to win 2/3 of the time my pocket 7's board at the top, then I end up breaking even, making zero money, right? I could have just folded and had the same expected value in that instance. This is very different to normal PLO. In normal PLO, when someone bets pot on the river, you're getting 2-1, which means you need to win the hand 33% of the time in order to break even. So you go from 33 to 66, which is completely counterintuitive for a regular player. So back to this hand, and now you understand the math and the incentives a bit better. So here's what I'm thinking. Well, if my opponent has 8-9, then he is, do we want him to call or do we want him to fold, right? Well, it's a bit tricky. If my opponent is a recreational player, doesn't know the game very well at all, if I pot out on this river, he might still call with 8-9, which would be pretty sick. If he calls every 8-9 combo, then my pocket sevens could actually be good at the bottom. If this player only has 8-9 but has no king and no queen at the bottom, no pocket eights, no pocket nines, right? I basically have the best hand with sevens at the bottom. I can scoop the entire pot plus a bet in case he calls. On the other side, if my opponent is very aggressive, he might put me on the bottom board on the turn. Maybe I had a hand like king x of hearts, maybe king x of spades, right? I had a hand like king 8-9, king jack 9 of spades, where I had the bottom board with a king, a gut shot, and the top I have a gut shot as well, and a flush draw. Like those hands are in a pretty tricky spot if they face another large bet on the river, because I don't have a good hand on either board. So if he has 8-9, naked 8-9, he might make the bet, and then I can play check, call, and scoop the entire pot. So it just shows the complexity of the game in terms of which line you want to take. It heavily depends on how aggressive your opponent is and how he's going to play 8-9. If my opponent happens to have a good hand on both boards, if he happens to have 8-9 plus a king, or king queen 8-9, or king 6 8-9, he will never fold against the bet. So basically my opponent will never fold if he ends up having a good hand on both boards. So we're not going to change basically what my opponent is going to do. We're not going to be able to scoop against that hand either way. So we have to put our entire focus on how to play best if my opponent only has 8-9. And there are different lines to take. Like if my opponent is a player that wouldn't call naked 8-9 on the river against a pot-sized bet, we could also go for a smaller bet and then get called by naked 8-9 at the top and scoop the entire pot by holding with sevens at the bottom. Right, so those are some of the things you want to consider in double board bomb pot. At the time, things go fast. I decided to pot the river, and my opponent went into a deep tank. He was not a very experienced PLO or double board PLO player, and I'm pretty sure he had 8-9, and he ended up making the fold. However, there is a chance he had a hand like 8-9 with pocket eights or 8-9 with pocket nines. Certainly a possibility, in which case I ended up scooping the entire pot, where if I would have checked and my opponent checks as well, we end up only getting half. So probably a pretty good outcome. Let's move over to the next hand. This was a bit of a lengthy explanation, but hopefully it shows you the complexities of this game and how interesting it is to think about how to maximally exploit your opponents and navigate through different hand types. This hand here is a hand that I played 2 days ago at a 5-5-10-20 game. So I have the top hand, which is ace 10 7 6, and my opponent happens to have the bottom hand, jack 7 6 4. First board comes 6 6 deuce, and the second board is ace 8 5. So I happen to have happen to have trips with a top kicker on the paired board, which is the more static board, and I also happen to have top pair and an open-ended straight draw at the bottom. Now I play here against seven opponents, so we're playing 8-handed, and everyone puts in 50, right? So there is $400 in the middle, and actually there were 7 players at the table, so $350 in the middle, and I'm first to act. If you're first to act, you generally want to check at a high frequency because you don't know what anyone else is doing, and you need a very special hand to start betting. My hand is special, and we're going to talk about this in a moment. But anyway, I lead out on the flop, and I do get raised by my opponent. And in this case, we're playing $4,500 deep, right? So we're playing very, very deep, an SPR of clearly over 10, and we have to make a decision on how to play. Now, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, how likely is it that I'm going to dominate my opponent with my hand? And in order to dominate someone, you really need to have a good hand on both boards, because the way double board equity runs is that you basically take the equity of both boards and then combine the equity to come to your total equity. And we at PLO Mastermind have actually a calculator that you will get access to for free, but also as part of the course, which you can play around with and understand different scenarios better. So anyway, this is the calculator, and here I just put in these 2 hands to show you the matchup. it would be 60-40 in this case. Now, my opponent ended up raising the flop, and I jam over the top, and we're going to talk about why in a second. But the equities run at 40-60, and the question that I had in hindsight was this avoidable by my opponent? Was the raise necessary on the flop? Now, if you have Jack 7-6-4, you want to ask yourself, how likely is it you're dominating your opponent? If you look at board number 1, 6-6 deuce, and you have Jack 6, you want to ask yourself, well, is my opponent betting with the second board or with a first board hand? And once again, most people bet and should bet the more static board, a lot more aggressive multi-way. So it is a lot more likely that I bet the 6-6 deuce board and not the ace-8-5 board. Even if I had a hand like pocket aces, it's not a great spot to be betting into 7 opponents or 6 opponents if the second board is 6-6 deuce. Because if I get raised with pocket aces, then my opponent could easily have a hand like the hand that my opponent has here, which is 7-6-4, where he's completely live on my board, where I'm drawing only to 2 outs, my pocket aces, on the second board. Very bad matchup, right? So an inexperienced player might put in too many chips with 2 aces in this scenario, and then Jack 7-6-4 is actually looking really good. However, if you play against more experienced players like myself, I will not have pocket aces in this spot. And the second player should ask himself, well, if I don't have aces and I play the first board, how good is the matchup holding Jack 7-6-4? Well, if you think about the first board, he has Jack 6, which is not a very good kicker, and he also doesn't have a boat. Right, so most likely this hand here needs to improve on the first board in order to win. If I have kings a6, king 6, queen 6, 6 deuce, I have a better hand, and this hand is significantly behind. On the second board, he happens to have a wrap. However, the problem with this hand is that a wrap has good equity against a hand like pocket aces, but a wrap can also break out and you have only Jack high. So let's imagine I only had 6 deuce. I had 6 deuce, for example, 6 deuce 7-4. In that case, he would need to improve on both boards to win the hand or chop the hand, which would put him significantly behind. So if you put all things together, this guy with Jack 7-6-4 should realize that I probably have a 6, and if I have a 6, I have him outkicked, and if I have a 6, I might have a6, which is pretty likely. And against a6, he needs to improve on both boards to win or on either board to chop. Not a really good proposition and certainly an avoidable spot. The second thing you're going to think about is very often if you play for it all on the flop and you have no fold equity, it is better to have a bit more of a marginal made hand on the second board versus a really good draw on the second board. And that is because the really good draw can just break out where the marginal made hand is sometimes good. So in this case, if this player happened to have an ace here, it would obviously be much, much better. Not only because he has a better kicker at the top, but also because at the bottom, he might just win with a hand like ace-jack or ace-7 if I happen to have a hand like 6-deuce. So again, these equities here are not too surprising considering I was betting into 6 opponents and then was willing to stack off. Now, lastly, I want to talk about this one concept over here. And you will see in the course that we have many more concepts because the game is very diverse and there are so many different unique spots and key concepts you want to think about. What you will get in this course is a lot of small tools that you can use for different scenarios to play better in all those different spots. So here is the last kind of spot I'm going to discuss. This is actually from the course, a hand that I played at 2550. And here I have ace-jack 7-7 with 3 hearts. And now you notice that on flop 2 or on board 2, I have the only nuts, right? So I mean, 4 deuce of hearts is a straight flush. But that aside for a moment, I happen to have the only nuts. Let's just assume that ace-jack 7 is the nut hearts here is the best hand, and we ignore the straight flush for a moment. I have the only nuts on board number 2. Board number 1, ace-king is the nuts at the moment. But if you happen to have ace-king, you don't have the only nuts. A lot of opponents will never fold ace-king at the top, which is a mistake, by the way, because if you have ace-king at the top, you have 2 problems, which you hopefully are now kind of aware of. Number 1, you don't have the only nuts. Someone else can have ace-king as well, which is a big problem because if ace-king has a better hand at the bottom, so you have naked ace-king, then you can only chop at best, and sometimes you get scooped. But the second problem is also that ace king might get outdrawn on the river at the top, right? So at the top, there's still a spade draw out there and the board can pair. So what I did in this case is I have a hand that I know that I can drive a lot of action very often on the river, right? Because the bottom hand will remain the only nuts very frequent, and I can put in as many chips as I want to on the river. So if I don't get ace king to fold at the top, what I do in this case is I bet smaller at the top, or I raise smaller at the top in this spot, because I actually want ace king to call. I want pocket queens to call. I want pocket jacks to call, because a lot of those hands will not be able to call again on the river. So making this pot really big on the turn, but keeping people in, is actually a good strategy, because I know that I can drive action on the river very, very often, because I have the only nuts at the bottom. And even if a guy happens to have ace king, let's say this guy peels ace king 5-6. So he happens to have the nuts at the top and bottom two, or two pair at the bottom. We arrive in a river spot where, let's say the pot is $3,000 and the river breaks off at the top, and at the bottom he doesn't improve. If I pot the river, actually, if he has two pair at the bottom, he might just be fine like calling. But let's say he has a hand like ace king 7-8, right? So he has an open ender at the bottom and ace king at the top. He calls the turn, the river breaks off on both ends, and he happens to have ace king at the top and nothing at the bottom. If I pot the river, we go back to the first principle, which was you need to win the hand 66% of the time at the top, not chop, but actually outright win to break even in this situation. So if this player is a good player, he might actually fold the river even if he has the absolute nuts, because he's not getting the right price to play for this pot given the mathematics behind it. And if you miss out on these spots, and you just always call on the river here with ace king with nothing at the bottom, you're making a huge mistake in massive pots for the size of your game, and you end up bleeding a lot of money. So those are pretty much the main sort of like tips that I want to share in today's video. There are a lot more to discuss with. And now I want to talk a bit more about mastering double board bomb pots, the course that we launched today on PLOmastermind.com. So in anticipation of this course launch, a lot of people have asked me, is this part of the PLO Mastermind subscription? It is not. This is a different, separate course, double board bomb pots, a different game. And if you guys want to get access to this course, it is a separate product. And you will find the link to this product here below in the description. Anyway, I want to talk a bit about like what is in this course and what you will learn. So if you enter the course section here in Mastermind, you will find these different theory videos that are attached to the theory parts in the ebook. So you can read the book, you can watch the videos, or what I would recommend is to do both, like read the book slowly and then watch the videos sort of as a repetition thing. On top of that, we also have these dual review videos where we review hands together. So here's an example. Just open this up. Welcome back, guys, to the PLO Mastermind. And the second one is we're out of position against the entire table. So what we do here is we use certain graphic tables, like you can see here at the bottom right, in order to establish some of the principles mentioned in the book and how this hand most likely is going to play out in theory. And that is basically how we're going to display and talk about the hands. On the bottom left, you can also see the math behind facing different bets and how often you have to win. Again, those are all principles established in the book and in the video lessons, in the theory lessons, that we're then applying in the sample hands. So you will get access to those 5 sample hands that you can see right over here that we discuss in great detail, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But also we do have some bonuses when you purchase this course. You also get access to some bonuses, and one of those bonuses is going to be 2 1-hour videos each. So that's 2 hours of content where we go through several hands that I played at the Aria together, and you can find them over here. I mean, this is how it basically is going to look like. So if you buy this course, access to those 2 videos as well. And then lastly, you also get access to this button, which allows you to submit your own double board PLO bomb pot hands over the summer. So over the next 2 months, we're going to collect as many double board bomb pot hands as possible from all the guys that purchased the course. And when we do film additional videos that we release in about 2 months about all those hands and add it to the course, So those are pretty much all the details. Let me go back to the actual page over here. Down in the description, there is a link where you can read through all that and all the bonuses. I think it's a fascinating and very creative game, especially because there is no GTO possible or out there. It really allows you to exploit your opponents to the maximum and understand with all the tools that you will get in this course how to do that properly. I'm looking forward to see you guys inside the course. Read through also the submitted hands. Please submit as many hands as possible. There are so many unique scenarios that we haven't worked through yet that we would love to do so in additional videos. So submit those hands. I'll see you guys inside the course. And hopefully, even if you are not going to buy this course, hopefully you got away, you took away a lot of lessons and ideas and inspirations from this video about how to play double board bomb pots better. I'll see you guys in the next video. This has been Jay Nandes, over and out. Have a nice day and good luck at the tables.